baby, your love was all it takes.
What's up guys, Cody Bidlow with ATHLETE.X coming at you with another video. Recently I posted on Instagram talking about the concept of whether or not we really need to have a single day each week dedicated to acceleration. I've always come from the standpoint of thinking that we need to separate training into, acceleration related training and top speed related training and speed endurance related training, and that things can fit into these boxes all nice and neat. And if we fill those boxes up, train those qualities well, and then go compete, that ultimately everything will fall into place and it'll all be hunky-dory. Now, over time, I would say that my perspective on this has shifted a little bit. I haven't gone totally away from thinking in that manner where I break things down into these groups and then, train them kind of in that way. So maybe one day, if we're doing acceleration on the track, then we go to the gym later in the day or the next day, and we do things that are pertinent to acceleration so that the themes of training are consistent. I still think that there's some validity to thinking in that way, and you definitely want to have themes of your training, but I don't think it's always as cut and dry as we like to make it out. And more importantly, I think that at a certain point, you need to be very careful about what qualities you're training, what proportion of your total training program is made up of any given quality, and how relevant those qualities are to the ultimate performance outcome that you seek. In the case of an intermediate or advanced sprinter, a point will come where the thing that is limiting their performance is how fast they can actually run, meaning the actual velocity, their maximal velocity, how high that number is. Can they run 10.5 meters per second? Can they run 11 meters per second? Can they run 12 meters per second? At a certain point, that's what's going to limit whether or not a sprinter runs faster or not. So if that's the main limiting factor, then we need to make sure that we're working on that and that what we're doing is lending to that quality being enhanced as much as we possibly can. And if over time, every week of training or every microcycle of training that you do, one entire day is never even touching that max velocity point, or in some programs, maybe rarely ever hitting that point of maximal velocity, then it would be no surprise to not see those sprinters continue to improve after a certain point. When you do acceleration work, by the very nature of it being classified as acceleration, you are not hitting top speed, right? If you were hitting top speed, then we would call it speed work or maximal velocity work. So if you are doing acceleration work and only acceleration work on a given day, you are not exposing your body to the demands, coordinative demands, the force output demands, the demands on the tissue, the neurological demands of maximal velocity running, and therefore you are not stimulating the body and the brain to adapt in a manner which lends itself directly to maximal velocity sprinting. Now some might say, well, you have to accelerate to get to top speed. This is very true. But when we do speed work, we already accelerate to get to that maximal velocity. So when you look at it from that perspective, you start to see acceleration work does not lend itself to generating higher levels of maximal velocity, but doing maximal velocity work inherently includes acceleration work and therefore lends itself to improving acceleration as well. So when you do top speed work, say 40s, 50s, 60s for some people, then you are working both acceleration and top speed in that workout. If you do an acceleration only day, you are predominantly only going to develop qualities which lend themselves to acceleration, to that earlier part of the run. And at a certain point, for most sprinters, they're going to kind of grow out of what they can gain from doing that week in and week out. And they have more to gain from doing a larger proportion of work that includes hitting top speed, that includes getting into speed endurance. Now, if you're a novice, then you probably can get away with doing a lot of acceleration work. If you are a team sport athlete, most of what you do in any team sport, as far as sprinting is concerned, is in the form of acceleration. So you should do a lot of acceleration work. You might not even need to do max velocity work. Probably should at some point, but you probably don't need to. On the flip side, when we talk about people who are trying to run 10.5, or they're trying to go from 10.5 to 10.0, or from 10.0 to 9.9, 9.8, very rare that anybody gets there. But if that's what your goal is, if you want to run faster, if you want to run pretty fast, faster than, say, 99% of the world, or 99.9% of the world, then you have to do a lot of maximal velocity focused work. And I don't mean a lot in that you have to do it, 7 days a week, but relative to your overall training program, the proportion of work done in that training program, which is stressful enough to induce an adaptation, that amount of work, there needs to be a lot of top speed. There needs to be a lot of speed endurance. And I don't mean to belabor the point, but if you're doing acceleration only on a specific day, you are not training maximal velocity. It's just the nature of it. Now, can we convince ourselves that we are? Can we convince ourselves that the qualities we're getting out of an acceleration only day are lending themselves to top speed or speed endurance? Sure, we can. But that doesn't mean that in reality, what we do on that day is actually going to make us faster, right? The only thing we can really depend on having any chance of making us run a higher maximal velocity is maximal velocity work. And like I said before, when you do maximal velocity work, what do you do to get up to that point of reaching that maximal velocity? You accelerate. So you are therefore working acceleration on any day that you do maximal velocity work. So if that's the case, why would we want to do a lot of days or spend a lot of weeks where some of that work we do is not even touching maximal velocity? Like I said earlier in the video, there's plenty to gain for novices, for team sport athletes, for doing acceleration only work. But when it comes to the intermediate or advanced sprinter, acceleration only work, in my mind, should probably be focused more toward the beginning of the season, kind of as a preparation for the longer distances to come, for that, preparation for that maximal velocity work and that speed endurance work, which is eventually gonna come. It's a great way to build up certain types of conditioning, with like short repeated accelerations. It's a great conditioning workout. But eventually, the proportion of the work that you do that is acceleration speed or speed endurance has to shift to those longer reps, has to shift to that top speed work, has to shift to the speed endurance work. And if we spend too much time outside of that, it's questionable whether or not we're going to see the gains that we need to see to get the improvements in time that we want to see in our 100, in our 60. I hope that makes sense. I think one important thing to consider is that we only have so much adaptive potential and we only have so much time. So eventually I'm going to be too old to run any faster. And at that point, it's just hanging on and trying to, not get hurt or find something else to do. For you, if you're a competing athlete, eventually the season's going to be over. Or eventually you're going to graduate and you're going to move on and you're going to do something else. So no matter what point you're at in your career, we're limited on time and we're also limited on adaptive potential. So you could think of adaptive potential as sort of like an energy of sorts. I only have so much energy to go work out at the track, right? Or at the gym. I can only do so many reps. Well, same thing with adaptive potential. There's only so many workouts you could do before your body stops responding as much, or before it stops responding at all to that specific stimuli. And at a certain point, if you're only doing acceleration work, if you're only going to 20 or 30 meters for one day of your training program, eventually that might not be enough to really move the performance in the direction that you want it to go. It doesn't mean that you're getting nothing out of that day, don't get me wrong. But if we're looking at, the most effective means of improving our performance in the 100-meter dash, there will come a point where doing 20-meter block starts are probably not contributing all that much to your performance outcome. Once you have a basic level of conditioning and once you have done enough acceleration work, I question whether it's stressful enough to induce the changes that we want if we're going to dedicate one specific day of the week to that type of workout. Why is that the case? Well, I think it comes back to the concept of how fast you're running. You know, if you run really fast in a workout, it's going to be really stressful, and there's going to be a huge adaptive, input to the body, and hopefully the body responds in a way which makes you run faster. But if you aren't reaching that top speed, if you aren't reaching close to that top speed, and you're not doing that frequently, I don't think you're going to run that much faster. And I myself have spent a lot of time doing programs, writing programs, running my own programs where it's acceleration day, speed endurance day. And at a certain point, I felt like, well, if I set it up that way, by the end of the month, how many times have I actually hit top speed? If I do each type of thing once a week, I've only exposed my body to maximal velocity somewhere between 4 and 8 times a week, depending on how that speed endurance day went. If on the flip side, we blend the acceleration work into the speed work, and we focus more on developing high velocity speed in a workout, we could maybe get, 10 exposures or 12 exposures to maximal velocity in a given month without burning out. If you multiply that over time, over the course of a year, over the course of 4 years, and you've exposed yourself to maximal velocity 20%, 30% more, if you have 2 athletes who did one approach and another athlete who did another, who do you think is going to run faster at the end of, say, a 4-year period? Probably the person who is exposed to maximal velocity more frequently. I think it's really important that we reconsider whether or not throughout the year in every athlete's program that we have acceleration taking up a specific day of the week. Instead, what I propose is that if you're an intermediate or an advanced sprinter, you use acceleration when it's useful, earlier in the year, in your warm-ups, during a deload week, but that as a core piece of your program, that you, instead of giving it a whole day, you give it a part of the workout. Like I said, you use it as a warm-up, or you understand that if you're hitting top speed, you did acceleration work to get there. So you don't need to dedicate a whole nother day. So I know there's going to be plenty of people who say, no, we need acceleration work because acceleration is what builds you up to top speed, and we can't neglect that. And I agree we can't neglect that, but we are not neglecting that when we do speed work by the very nature that we accelerated to maximal velocity. So I would encourage you to consider trying this out in your own program, particularly if you have a few years of training under your belt, or you're working with athletes who aren't complete novices, who are, fairly competent when it comes to sprinting. Give it a shot. Try out what it's like that instead of doing 20s on one day, why don't you just do 40s? Lengthen it out a little bit. What I think that you'll find is that athletes are more comfortable in upright running. Athletes are more comfortable in those periods of the race where the coordinative demands are the highest, where the neurological demands are the highest, where you're really hitting high frequencies and you're just giving all that you got. If you're exposed to that more over time, you will be more confident there. You will be more competent there. You'll probably run faster during that period if you've been exposed to that maximal velocity enough. And when we say we're going to dedicate this whole chunk of time to something that isn't that, I believe we're possibly taking away from our, potential of running as fast as we can. And one last thing to remember, the vast majority of a 100-meter dash, even of a 60-meter dash, is spent relatively or completely upright. Most of the time that you're sprinting in a race, you are upright. So if you're doing a lot more upright sprinting in your program, you're probably going to be better prepared for when you go in the race and you spend 80% of the race sprinting upright. And by doing more of the speed-focused work, you're inherently going to be training yourself to be comfortable in that posture, comfortable getting to that posture, rising from an acceleration position upright into where you're going to finish the race. Those things are important qualities that you have to develop, and you'll only develop them if you're hitting top speed in the workout. If all you do are 20s and you're training just to grind your way to 20 meters, and then right when you hit 20 meters, you pop up and slow down, what kind of habits are you developing? When you're in a race, are you going to feel a comfortable, smooth transition if you've never done it? Or if you haven't done it very frequently? Probably not. And I say this because I've seen this. When I've had athletes do pure acceleration work at practice, what do? They use bad habits. They try to get to that 20-meter cone as quick as they can, however they can. They try to beat out their friend next to them, or they try to beat the clock. And then they get through the cone and they, just kind of let it go from there. They might pop up. They might change their stride, whatever. But those are habits that they're now sticking into their head, that if they were doing a 40 or a 50 and they rose through upright and then stopped and decelerated, that the habits they're developing doing that are probably going to be more conducive to 100-meter performance than smashing your way through a 20-meter mark and then standing up abruptly and smashing your way to a stop. So there's a few layers to this, and I'm sure over time we'll probably parse it out a little bit more. But I just want to get you guys thinking, opening your mind to the possibility that maybe the way that we've been setting up our programs for the last 30 years could be shifted for some people, and that those shifts could be for the benefit of those people. So give it a shot. Try exposing your athletes to more true speed work. Over time, replacing acceleration days with a blend of acceleration and top speed. You could have 2 days where maybe they're both focused on top speed, but one's a shorter speed day. Maybe you do 40s, another day's a longer speed day. Maybe you do 50s or 60s, but you could do it however you want. Just keep in mind, when you work acceleration, you're not working speed. When you do work speed, you are working acceleration. So you could get 2 birds with 1 stone focusing on the speed work, but that's not going to happen if you only focus on the acceleration work. Thanks again for tuning in, guys. I appreciate you watching this video. If you like my content, feel free to check out my Patreon. Feel free to check out my website where I sell workout programs. Hit me up on social media if you have any questions. I'll catch you next time.